Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Badass and the Buddha. This is a community that we are developing, and we are striving to have relevant conversations about topics that will affect each of us at some point in our lives. It's likely that it will anyway. And so my name is Annie Fonte. I'm the Badass.
And I'm Alexis Williams, the Buddha.
And today, Alexis is going to take charge, and I have no idea what we're talking about. So I'm going to hand it off to her because she has an idea. So what do you got, Alexis?
Yeah, Annie. So my idea is this. Annie, as some of us may know or not, has a book coming out, and it's due out in the latter part of August or the first part of September.
It is.
And I'm so excited because I haven't even read it yet, and I've only heard little pieces here and there. So what I wanted to do is take this time and ask Annie some questions for this up-and-coming book, and kind of like what was the inspiration to dive into writing a book?
Well, a couple of things. One is that I felt that it would be a good exercise for me to go through as I reflected back on my life and some of the events and the experiences that I had. And number two, I really wanted to, for myself, tell the truth about my life, and in so doing, encourage other people to tell the truth about their life. I think oftentimes we go through our lives and we don't want to take full responsibility for the choices that we've made. And it's a lot more comfortable to point your finger at someone else or another situation other than realizing that at the end of the day, it all comes down to the choices we've made throughout our lives that create the consequences and the circumstances in our lives. And I wanted to be brave enough to tell the truth about that, to encourage other people to tell the truth about their own lives.
Yeah. And so, Annie, I want to ask you, because sitting down to such a vulnerable place, because you're really, as I understand, you're just really truthful in this book. How did you sustain your interest in it? Like, I'm sure maybe there were times maybe you wanted to pull back or not. It was a sense of how did you discipline yourself, or how did you actually navigate that?
Yeah. So what I did is I chose to write every Thursday. And I wrote all day every Thursday, and I started in late October of last year, so October of 2018, and every Thursday I would write, I don't know, anywhere between 8 and 10 hours in those days. So that was a discipline. Mm-hmm. And the great thing for me is I'm a very disciplined person, so the discipline part wasn't hard for me. And how I started out was I just started writing. I went back to childhood and I just started getting things down on a piece of paper. And I'm sure real artists that do this for a living would tell you that there's a process that you go through and you take notes and you do an outline and all those kinds of things. I didn't. Mm-hmm. I just started putting out onto the page what came up for me from feelings and memory. So that's how I did it. And were there days I wanted to leave it? There were some uncomfortable days. There's some parts that are challenging to revisit, but I was determined that my ultimate goal was to serve the reader. At the end of the book, I want the reader to have gotten something out of this for themselves that makes their life better in some way, shape, or form. So I kept that in mind, and that helped me stay focused too, mm-hmm. even through some of those rough patches.
Mm-hmm. So Annie, what I want to ask you, because I know for myself and other people I've spoken to, they might want to write or do something creative, and they really struggle with that process of being disciplined. Would you have something that you could share that helps you, or how you learn to become so disciplined?
Well, for me, it's just a choice. And you're either going to decide you're going to do it or you're not. And if you decide you're going to do it, there's no excuse not to. And my personal feeling is when we start to make excuses for not doing things in our lives, it's because we're uncomfortable for some reason and we don't want to do it, or we feel like it's going to, there's a fear component to it as well, I think. And so it's like, and I'll tell you, this is a good example. each morning I write down all the things I want to accomplish that day. And I start with what I call the shit sandwich at the top of the list. And so it's the thing I least want to do in my day. I put it at the very top of the list. And then I end with the thing that will bring me the most joy, will be the most fun for me to do. And so I start my task. I do shit sandwich first and work my way down. So at the end of the day, I get to wrap up my day doing something I really enjoy doing. So that's a discipline. I just decide to get the stuff I don't care to do out of the way first. And it's something I've practiced my whole life. So it comes to me easier than maybe for others. And all I can say is you just have to practice. You just have to take it in tiny steps and decide you're going to clean the junk drawer out, and then clean the junk drawer out. Get it done. We talked about the garage last week, right? Clean the garage one corner at a time, or one cabinet at a time, or one box at a time. And when you get practiced at it, then it becomes more natural to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's for me, at least.
Yeah. So Annie, I'm sure there's been a moment that you were really tested on that, where you really hit the wall and had to really take a moment to find your way back. How did you do that, and what was that like when that strength maybe just wasn't there?
I think for me, the thing that I kept focusing on when I was writing is the end user, you folks, the reader who would eventually read this. And I really wanted to create a book or a document or something that would serve you as the reader. And so that's what I kept reflecting on is I'm not writing this book for me. This book is not about me. It's about my life, but it's not about me. This book is about you, the reader, and how you can pause and reflect on your own life and make better choices for yourself, which allow you to live a really joyful and fulfilled and thriving life. And keeping that in mind was very useful for me throughout the whole process.
Yeah, so you had a strong sense of purpose.
Yes.
Yeah. And what would you say was the biggest growth point that you got after, when you could finally just say, because I know you had the good fortune of finally sending it off and getting a clean copy back and picking out a cover, and now
the growth point. What I learned most about myself in writing this book was when I allowed myself and I was committed to telling the truth about all the experiences and events in my life, I had a huge sense of freedom. That truth-telling opened up all the doors and windows to my life. And I wasn't keeping any secrets. I didn't have anything to hide. And that felt really freeing. There was a huge release in being able to do that. So that's probably what I learned the most about myself.
Yeah. And so now that you have this book, what's the next step that you'll be taking to share more about you in the world?
With using the book, or?
Yeah, just what's your next step now?
Yes.
You're out there, and now you'll.
Well, here's the status. We're looking at different book cover options, and the editing has been done, and now they'll format it into the book, and I'll get to look at that one more time and put some of the finishing touches on it. And then the actual physical book will be available for readers to buy, and it's going to be through Amazon and Barnes and Noble and many different other avenues, as well as my own website and my own social media accounts. And so from there, I'm excited for the opportunity to go give talks about the book, and as readers read it, answer questions and do book signings and interviews about the book, whether it be on television stations or people like Alexis or podcast. And so it will be a continuation, and the book is really the vehicle that will allow us all to be in community and conversation about what the book is about and how we can really look deeply into our own lives and start to enjoy each moment, enjoy the experience of each moment, and not get so far out in front of ourselves in the future that we're taking away the present moment and the joy in those moments, regardless of what the experience is. It could be something not so good that happens to us, but if we can find the growth in understanding that moment I think it will keep us in a state of presence, and it will help diminish a lot of the fear that we often experience in our lives.
Yeah, and that reminds me of something I've been working with is the magic and the mundane. And I just want to ask you, what was your last when you saw magic in the mundane in daily life, or something just really got your attention?
This morning. Every day, every morning, I get to. That's the other thing that you'll find when you start to think about these things. Your have tos turn into get tos. Your need tos turn into want tos. And so this morning, I was feeding my horses, but I also have some landscaping down at my barn that I needed to water. And that can be a fairly mundane thing. You got to drag the hose around and water these plants, and you're standing there and whatnot. But I thought, if you're really present in those moments, as I challenge myself to be, I felt the breeze because it was a beautiful morning here in Southern California, and I watched my flag kind of move in the wind, and then I noticed that my wisteria plant here in the middle of July had a bloom on it, and it was up against the flag, and it was all so beautiful, and I listened to my horses as they ate, and I listened to the birds chirp because I was right there, and I appreciated that I turned this knob and water comes out of this thing called a faucet that's hooked to a hose that allows me to water my plants. I notice the colors of the plants. I notice the blooms on them. All the tiniest little things I become very aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And my sensory acuity has really sharpened as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So then the next thing I'd like to ask you is this idea around community.
Okay.
So I know you and I are kind of alike because we kind of like hang out on our own and have a lot of fun. But how do you see yourself stretching into community in terms of, who do you want to play with out there?
Well, I think especially coming from my background, having grown up on a farm in the Midwest, and I have to say to this day, I so admire those folks. They're so salt of the earth, and they're so compassionate and hardworking and beautiful people. And so I would say that's one community that I would like to inspire, whether it's the guy and the gal that are sitting on their tractor all day or sitting on their horse all day doing their craft to create an opportunity for themselves and their family to have a roof over their head and food in their bellies at the end of each day, and really give that group of people the opportunity to step into an environment that is safe and sacred, meaning the community that we want to develop, and have conversations that are inspiring and valuable to them, and through interaction with other people in the community to get ideas and to share sorrow as well as sadness, as well as joy, as well as any kind of inspiring ideas or experiences that they've had with each other, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what really keeps us all going, is to know that we're loved and adored and admired by someone, right?
And it reminds me, we were sharing the book Cowboy Ethics.
Right.
And what brought that to mind for me is how we're oftentimes more alike than we are different.
Right.
And how that brings to mind for me, Annie, with you is this, how you're so consistent, one foot in front of the other over time. And how could you take your depth and your knowledge, being so close to the earth as a farm girl, and maybe talk to someone, like even if it was a millennial, how would you might want to share that with someone?
Well, for me, we all, whether you're a boy or a girl, a man or a woman, we all put our pants on the same way, right? We all have fears, and we all have things that make us laugh and things that make us sad. We all have that alignment with one another. And we all have blood running through our veins, and a heart that beats, and internal organs that keep us alive and thriving. And to really, I think the important thing in communicating with anyone is to have you or them feel that I'm no better than you, I'm no lower than you, I'm no higher, I'm no anything more than you. We're all the same. We were all created by, and it's at least my belief, that God created us all in His image, and we all at least have that in common. And to really appreciate the human race in that way that is wholesome, and it is not looking for something to be offended by, but looking for a way to help the guy next to you out. That's what they teach the Navy SEALs, right? When you're laying shoulder to shoulder with your SEAL mates, you make sure you have the guy next to you's back, and they have your back, and that's what makes it work as a community.
Yeah. And so I'm reading this book, How to Live a Good Life, and he has these 3 buckets. And I just wanted to ask you, one of them's his vitality and connection, and then this contribution. So we kind of hit on a lot of these, but in terms of vitality, do you have a practice or a ritual or a way that you pull from for your vitality to get filled, maybe spiritually or?
I do a couple of things. I spend a lot of time in nature. I'm outside a lot, and I have 2 horses and a dog, and I allow them to teach me all that they have to offer, because if you let them, these animals will teach you a lot, as does nature. Nature is my closest companion. I go on a lot of walks, and I spend a lot of time being grounded. I think that's the big thing for me about nature, having grown up on a farm and having such a close connection to the earth, that nature allows me to continue to have that type of a connection. And the other thing I do, and stick with me on this because you might think it sounds morbid, but it's not. I truly believe that death is the greatest teacher we have in our lives. And I often think, okay, what if my angel of death comes down to me tonight before I go to sleep and says, guess what, Annie? You have a week to live. How would I approach life differently if that was the case? So I remind myself of that a lot. Even during the day when I'm doing something at my office, or I take my dog Two Socks for a walk out around the building, I really am present to looking at the sky and appreciating the blue, pure color of it. Or if it's cloudy, appreciating the shapes of the clouds, and the smells that are around me, and the sounds that are around me, and the curiosity that my dog has for everything. I really practice saying present to that moment, and it helps a lot. It changes my conversations with people. It changes how I think about things. It changes how the behaviors that I actually have, and makes life a lot easier. So those are a couple of things that I do.
Yeah, and this is always asked, but I can't resist asking it with where you are now in life. And that is, if you could have 3 people to have dinner with, who would you have dinner with now?
Well, I would have thought of this. I have thought about this question many times in my life, but first and foremost and always, for me, it would be God, Jesus, the Trinity, right? And I do think about that. I have the opportunity to have dinner with that entity every day, but to have a real life experience of that would certainly be big for me. The other would be Gandhi. I think the fella has a lot he could teach me, right? Mm-hmm. And the other would be having dinner with any small child that is of the age where they can communicate with you, because children, before we adults layer the human condition onto them, they're some of the wisest people that are walking the planet.
And so that's me also thinking, because I had the opportunity to spend some time with my neighbor, who she's quite elderly, and she's lived in this amazing house forever, and she took me on a tour, and it was the value of generations, of learning from others. Right. And do you have someone elderly that you've come to know that's really shared a piece of wisdom with you?
Who would that be for me? That's an excellent question. I'm going to need to ponder that a bit. Yeah, I'll tell you. There's 2 people come to mind. One is Flo Green, and Flo is no longer with us in this plane, at least. She passed away about 5 years ago. Beautiful human being. She's just a wonderful lady. She was in her late 80s, and she was one of those people that everything she looked at, every human being she interacted with, she just was bedazzled by them. She looked at them with so much love and kindness. And her husband, Dan Green, is still alive. He's going to be 98 in a couple of
Wow.
weeks. And I see him often. And every time I sit down with Dan Green, he has some words of wisdom to impart on me. And it may be a story he tells from his own childhood or something that happened that day. But his way of explaining it and his way of sharing it, I always learn something from him. So that would be my elderly choices for today.
That sounds good. And where do you want to be in 5 years?
You know, I tend to not want to get too out in the future in front of myself. I want to, in 5 years, feel the same way about life that I feel today. And that is having gratitude for being given my next breath for as long as the world's willing to give it to me, and to appreciate the little things about life, and to keep in mind that we're not promised our next breath, but each one we have is precious, and to really enjoy each one. And so that brings it back for me is to practice presence, which you're the expert at. You're the Buddha. And I've learned a lot from Alexis about that, is to really go back to your breath, really stay centered, and ask yourself, because we all know, what do you need in that moment? And stay in that moment and walk through life one precious moment at a time.
Hey, and so if you were to mentor a young girl in her 30s, what pieces of wisdom, maybe just even one, would you want her to know that you've learned?
I would say, depending on their particular situation, there is huge value in letting go of any thought or any person or anything that doesn't serve you, and bring joy to your life and support you and assist you in evolving to the next level in your life. Number one. The second thing I would say to a 30-year-old young woman is make fear your friend. Because for me, fear keeps my ass squarely planted in the saddle. And by the way, that's the name of my book. It's called Keep Your Ass in the Saddle. Because when fear shows up for me, it's this loyal reminder that I'm not in the saddle, that I've swayed off and I'm headed toward the ditch. And when I say thank you for reminding me, it brings me back to where I need to be. It helps me get centered again. So those are a couple bits of advice that I would give to a younger person.
Okay. And so what would you say is your very next step? Like you're just on the cusp and now you're getting ready to go out the gate and you're going to do some talks. But what else is there on your calendar for things to do?
Other than that are related to the book?
Yeah.
Well, on my list of things on my calendar, believe it or not, it's amazing. I think this is why I've never had a child. And I often hear what women go through to give birth to a child. And I think, gosh, if you went through that once, why would you do it over and over again? And now I kind of get it, because I feel like I've given birth to this book, right? And I was so disciplined for the past many months of sitting down and writing every Thursday. And I haven't needed to do that in the last couple of months at least, because for the most part, the book's done. But I have an inkling to go back and do it again. Huh. And so I think there's another book in me. So watch out.
So stay tuned.
Yeah.
So Annie, what would you want to tell everyone if we're kind of complete here? What would you say is your parting words for this? Because we'll continue to do these as she continues to move forward with the book. What would you like to leave people with today?
Well, here's what I'd like to leave you all with today. Books are really stories, right? And books are about storytelling. And we all have a story. And I would encourage you, if the story you're currently telling isn't a good one, start telling a different story. Change your current story to something that is inspiring to you and others. Start showing up in your life, taking full responsibility and accountability for the choices that you've made, and make your story from this day moving forward one that is inspiring and fulfilling and allows you to show up in the world as who you authentically are, and in some way, shape, or form, know you make a difference.
That sounds perfect.
How about
I'm
that?
excited.
Well, good. I'm glad you're excited.
Okay, so I think that's a wrap.
Okay, so stay tuned, you guys.
Yeah.
We'll keep you posted on the status of my book, and then next week we'll swing around with another conversation about something. Please, please, in the comment section, let us know what you would like to hear about, because this is part of developing the community. What do you want to hear about us? What conversation would you like to have with us? And we'll make sure that it happens. And until we see you again, have a kick-ass day and week.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that a deal?
Sounds good.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.